Wired into technology transformation, this is the Digital Bulletin podcast.
Hello folks, thanks for tuning in and welcome along to episode number 6 of the Digital Bulletin podcast. We hope in these troubled times that familiarity will bring you some comfort. So joining me today, as ever, we have Digital Bulletin Content Director James Henderson.
Hello.
And CEO Rom Broad.
Good day. I was going to say good morning, but anyone could be listening at any time.
Exactly, the uniqueness of a podcast, eh? That is
Yeah.
How are we doing on this fine spring? Is it spring yet?
Almost, isn't it?
Almost.
But
yeah.
does it even matter
No.
these days as we face the challenges of global pandemics? I mean, everything is a bit surreal, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, not bad. It seems slightly strange. The last time we were on about 5 weeks ago, coronavirus was on the agenda, but it really was this sort of secondary thing. We were wondering out loud whether MWC might be cancelled. Like the idea that it could have gone ahead now is just obviously ridiculous. So
yeah,
I'm thinking back to simpler days when it was just a possibility that we might cancel a big event.
It was a bit of a footnote, really, wasn't it? It was kind of
it was the first big one, I think.
Yeah, things are very different now, and obviously we're gonna touch on that in today's episode, listener. Of course, we cannot avoid it. So yeah, coming up, we will talk more about the coronavirus, because obviously what everybody needs is more people spouting their unqualified opinions on a global pandemic. Definitely. We'll also discuss our recently published case study on Thames Water and hear from the Chief Technology Officer of enterprise blockchain firm R3. But first, some news. Setting aside COVID-19 for a minute, there has still been plenty of activity in the business tech world. We've seen the Pentagon asking for court permission to revisit the $10 billion cloud contract it awarded to Microsoft last year. Now, the Project Jedi saga looks like it won't be coming to a conclusion anytime soon, which is exactly what primary antagonist AWS would like. It's been a busy month in the container space. VMware revealed a major overhaul of its products earlier in March. AWS launched a new operating system for container apps, and Containership, one of the earliest container management startups, had its assets snared by Hitachi Vantara, and HPE has made its own container platform live, so lots going on there. In other news, the fines have been totting up for Apple, $500 million for slowing down the performance of old devices, and $1.2 billion for illegally restricting how wholesalers sell its products. Now, while elsewhere we've seen Nokia appoint a new CEO, Volkswagen pitching software that it claims will stop car accidents by 2050, and India lifting a ban on crypto trading. Now, you can find a full roundup of the reporting on these stories and many, many more via the bulletin on digitalbullet.in. But now we're going to go where everybody has been before us. Coronavirus, technology, everybody's lives. There's no script here. We're just going to roll with it and try and make sense of what on earth is going on at the moment. Guys, this is probably going to be one of the last times we actually sit down face to face, certainly for a few weeks, few months.
Yeah, I mean, so like everybody else, we have to make decisions about what we do, and we're kind of lucky. There are so many businesses out there that are not digital media companies. Fundamentally, that's what we are, which means when we decide to work from home, which we have decided to do as of very soon, we can still operate, and we can still do what we do. So I'm completely distracted by someone setting off a microwave.
The world carries on, The world rotates on its
weird.
axis. It continues to go on. People still cooking microwavable meals.
People still need to eat, right?
Yes.
And so we're lucky because people still need to consume information. The world doesn't stop. People work from home, but they're still working, and that's what we'll be doing. But it's such a strange place to be, because obviously for us, our priorities are exactly the same as everyone else, and fundamentally that means keeping ourselves safe and thinking about our families and all of those things, these things that are always much more important, right?
Yeah. James, how are you feeling? Just a general thing to get started. How are you feeling about?
I mean, we're living in pretty extraordinary times, aren't we? And everything is changing at such a fast pace that even by the time people listen to this, things will inevitably have moved on. I think Rom's right. We are in a quite a privileged position, I suppose, that we've been told, work from home and isolate and stuff like that. But for example, my sister works in the health service, right? She's an A&E nurse. I mean, you're not, you talk about being at the coalface of stuff. My brother works in construction. These are not jobs that can just be done from home and stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, it is a worrying time. But I'd come back to it and say that actually, for people like us, it's we have the privilege of being able to make those decisions, work from home, and have technology tools where we can still speak daily and stuff like that. So it's bad, but you always have to consider that other people are in a much worse position.
Exactly, and I think this is impacting everybody. It's sort of kind of unprecedented in that sense. We have to try and focus on the tech aspects of it, and let's talk a bit more about this remote working thing that many people who've never done that before are having to do right now. Do you think, first of all, businesses are ready to embrace remote working so suddenly? Do you think the tech is in place, is what I'm saying? We know collaboration tools are used by businesses, but this is going to test those strategies, isn't it? This sudden move to remote working.
So I think the answer to that question is yes and no. So are the tools there? Yes they are, and they've been around for a long time. I mean, and some of the big players are obviously helping with that. So Google's announced its Hangouts premium stuff is going to be free up until July, I think, and I suspect we will be leveraging that, and various other things that are happening for some of the common platforms. Microsoft Teams famously broke as soon as this week started, and the volume of traffic went up. But I think it was fixed really quickly. So that the tools are there. The tools are there, but it clearly is. It's a challenge even for the providers of these tools, isn't it? Because it's suddenly a huge leap in the amount of
Also, you say it got fixed. I mean, I think it was 9 a.m. GMT it broke, but also broke yesterday afternoon as well. Yeah. So they got it back up working, but obviously they're going to see the number of people, and number of companies fly up, and their own infrastructure might not be ready to be able to cope with the demand. So it's going to be a huge challenge, whether you use Teams or Slack or any of these sort of various work collaboration tools. It's going to be a challenge for the people using them for the first time to sort of get into the habit of that and seeing how they work. But it's also going to be a challenge for the companies who own these, because I don't think that they would ever have been able to prepare for such an increase in their usage.
I was going to ask you about the people, the employees themselves, because most companies have tools like this now. Some workers, really embrace them and engage them and use them. Obviously, others are a bit more reticent to sort of use them. There's no real choice now, is there?
Yeah, so that's the no part of my response there before, which was that the tools are there, but tools are tools, and in the end, a tool is only good as the person on the end of it and how well equipped they are to use it. Now, we're lucky because we're kind of familiar with working in this way, and lots of other companies of our sort of type are fine. But a lot of enterprises, especially really big ones, this is going to be quite difficult, I suspect, because it's not just a technology problem, it's a training problem. And as anyone who knows or has experience working from home for any length of time, and I know I have, it's not technology that's the problem. It never is. It's how do you maintain the discipline that means you can remain productive, and it's actually really, really quite hard, especially if you've got a family.
Lots of issues potentially arising. James, we know that we hear a lot of leaders in industry talking about the shift to like new ways of working, and in a way, do you think this pandemic is kind of speeding that up, and might even see a revolution in the way we work? And once coronavirus is the thing of the past, in however many years,
I think so. I mean, we've for such a long time read and spoken about some of the benefits of working from home, and those are from people not wasting hours and hours a week commuting, or the environmental damage that millions of people going from out in the country to city centres has. So I think that even though there were clear benefits, people, in my opinion anyway, the vast majority of companies have always been reticent to sort of empower their employees and trust them to work from home. There's always, certainly in this country anyway, there seems to have always been a distrust of working from home. Like people, skive off or not do what they're supposed to do. Obviously, this takes the power away from those employees, whoever they may be, and forces people to work from home. And I think it will be probably for a concerted period of time as well. So I think, in answer to your question, yeah, we certainly could do. If companies see that actually there's not a huge downtick in terms of the work that's been done or productivity, as long as we don't see huge shifts there, then actually it could become the new normal, or certainly it will be a large-scale use case that actually working from home is a viable thing. It is possible for people to do, and actually people aren't just going to skive off, because most people don't do that. Most people take their work quite seriously.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out ultimately. Let's move on to a sort of another angle on this, and we know that healthcare systems around the world are obviously under enormous pressure and strain from just the scale of this outbreak. Rom, you've been looking at some and you've been speaking to some people in the healthcare industry directly, and looking at how different systems and different technologies in different sort of areas of the world how are they dealing with this problem? It's an enormous issue, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, absolutely. And there's a raft of different challenges that they're facing. If we look at it just through the prism of technology, one of the things I just happen to have been spending a lot of time talking to CIOs of healthcare organisations in Europe and in the States recently, and one of the very common things that seems to be true is that the healthcare system as a whole, however it's governed, has similarly fragmented, like a jigsaw of different platforms, and that's especially true in the States, where you have got fundamentally a for-profit healthcare system where you've got lots of players in the marketplace competing with each other, and what they do, because they're competitive, is don't really give too much away to anyone else. The integrations between these systems are not great, and so there's all sorts of efforts going on to try to address the challenge of data sharing, in particular between all these different systems, but we're not there yet, and so that's going to be something that becomes an exacerbated problem, it would appear, as part of this. Now, if we look here in the UK, where we've got a much more obviously socialised system with, in theory, in principle at least, a more centralised command and control kind of structure, then you would imagine that what that should mean is that there's a lot more commonality in terms of the systems that are being deployed around the country. Unfortunately, that's just not true, and that dates back to the 1990s, when the government of the time decided to change the way this worked. They felt that it was inefficient to have procurement on a national level like that, and introduced instead a marketplace for these sorts of services, and said, look, on a much more local level, people who are commissioning these things, whether it's on a hospital by hospital basis or more regionally, you get to make the decisions. You go and do your procurement, you get the systems that you want. A lot of what happened, therefore, is that American healthcare systems providers filled those gaps, by and large. There's one or two big players, actually, that provide most of those systems. And so even in the UK, where you've got a very centralised system, you've still got a fragmented picture of legacy systems.
In this time, we've seen leaders in politics and business having to make decisions that would never have been imaginable. Do you think it's now time for private healthcare companies to maybe look at the greater good here? And we've seen in the UK, certainly, we've seen damaging sort of headlines around private healthcare companies making money from the NHS, and that's really been brought into sharp focus, hasn't it? Do you believe there's a possibility that there could be some form of compromise here?
I think most people, I don't know, I mean, we're guessing really, but I think most private organisations are doing absolutely the right thing. They are working to try and address these problems in a collaborative way. I think, but there are outlying issues. There was a major headline in Germany just a couple of days ago where one of many companies that are trying to develop a serviceable vaccine quickly was offered $1 billion by Donald Trump to secure that exclusively for the United States, which is the exact diametric opposite of what anybody should be doing. Now, maybe we shouldn't be surprised that that's the kind of way that Donald Trump might behave in an election year, but I think the response to that was fairly robust from the Germans. And so, but by and large, I think you can see everybody acting in a spirit of common good, and that's gone so far as obviously in Spain. The government has simply co-opted the private healthcare system. They said, right, you're not private anymore. That's that. Yeah. We need your beds.
Yeah, so there are examples of it. Actually, collaboration is an interesting sort of segue into our next topic, which is communications and misinformation around the coronavirus. James, we know this is the first virus to go viral. Someone said in our office. There is so much information out there, obviously so much false information out there as well. We've seen actually today an update on the story where the biggest tech companies, Facebook, Twitter, Google, that they've sort of released a joint statement of like committing themselves to working together to try and streamline the messaging, I guess, around the coronavirus, and working with health agencies and departments all around the world to try and solve this issue. In this, we know how much power these guys have. We talk about it all the time. How much responsibility do they have in this situation, those companies?
Well, absolutely massive, because we always say in some ways they are more powerful than the governments. People pay more heed to the stuff they see on social media than they do governments coming out and making statements, right? So it's absolutely incumbent on them that the messaging is correct, that we cannot have the spread, for example, of fake news like we've seen in past elections or referendums. They have to do everything in their power to make sure that the messaging is as simple as possible, is as accurate as possible. And they're going to have to put huge amounts of resource into that. For example, we know that despite the fact that we are in this sort of scenario where we all have to club together, there's still going to be people out there who use it for their own means, which are not necessarily positive. For example, we know already that hackers are targeting hospital and healthcare systems, for example. So there are some really bad people out there who will use this to their own benefit, whether it's the spread of fake news or cyber attacks on those sorts of organisations. So they have a real moral, societal obligation to get together and do the absolute best for society in general.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because they don't actually have any obligation because they're private companies. But the way the world is today, it's almost inevitable that they do.
They have to, and actually, I'm sure there's no doubt that those companies will be, some of the first organisations or bodies that the government will be speaking to and liaising with, such as their power. And we have to recognise that. To say that they're just technology, they're not really technology companies at all. A lot of people base their almost lives around this, and sometimes it's the only place where they get any of their information. So it absolutely has to be accurate.
Yeah, and there's a very important the communication piece and how you control it is absolutely critical to how countries everywhere are going to be able to respond to this, because and a really important factor is the primary objective of every strategy being employed in every country is not to stop the virus, because that's impossible. It's to manage it. Ultimately, the end point of this virus is where you develop herd immunity, which is 60% or more of the population has had it and they're immune, and therefore it becomes controllable in the same way that flu is, just on a seasonal basis, right? That's normal. You want to get to that point. The crisis is because it's so contagious, it's growing so fast that it's overwhelming the ability of any health system to manage it, and so you're trying to slow it down. Now, the problem is, if you've got an overwhelmed health system, you get just as many deaths of people who now can't get operations or can't get treated for other things, or drive their car into a tree and can't get seen quick enough. And these secondary deaths are a major concern. And a principal contributor to that problem is people panicking and doing really dumb things.
And to bring this back to the point, you're saying this is because there is a sort of overwhelming amount of kind of panic-based sort of hysteria.
And social media, etc., has got a big part to play in that.
Huge, it fuels it.
So as James, as somebody who is looking for information about the current, like everybody else in the world at the moment, do you feel satisfied that you're able to get that information?
Not really, but there's so much noise around it. And there's so much distrust almost of politicians, even when they're coming out and saying stuff like, do you really trust what Boris Johnson or Donald Trump says? I don't. So who are you actually listening to? Who actually can you believe? So it's a huge problem. I don't know the answer to it because there's so much information out there. I mean, this talks to a wider societal problem about there's too much information, there's too much noise. I don't know how to cut through it. And in answer to your question, no, I've got no idea what we should be doing. I hear from one... The thing is, you have healthcare professionals, hugely talented, some of the best minds in the world, who disagree about what is the best way. Do you go for the herd immunity? Do you lock up? So how am I, as a layperson, supposed to really be satisfied that I have the best information at my fingertips and understand it, when even the best healthcare professionals in the world disagree? You know, and you have to wonder what their political bias is and what their business interest is too. No, I've got no idea.
That's
so,
the thing.
you know.
And in terms of social media, I think it's one of its great strengths. You know, giving people a platform, giving people a voice. In this instance, is probably its weakness because,
100%.
and the difference here is that everybody on social media is invested in this somehow. It's not like sport or something else. Like everybody probably is forming opinions and is listening to everybody else, and it's creating this noise where it's almost impossible. And another thing is that the situation is changing hourly. You know, and therefore, you know, what someone thought a day ago is probably completely irrelevant and not supported by any kind of basis of fact today. So you know, I mean, we're gonna have to move on at some point. We're gonna have to move on, and we've got other things to talk about. But
the science, we need to follow the science. By the way, you don't get any of that on social media. No. You just don't. If you actually want to know what's going on, how to make a good decision, skip the social media bit and go to the hard data and listen to people who are commenting on that. It takes more effort, but do it.
It does take. Well, and one last point I'll make. Obviously, in this time where we're self-isolating and everything's shut, there's no leisure activities, people will more and more congregate towards social media because it's one of the last things left that you can do. So actually, the problem inevitably will get worse.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Well, that's a nice positive.
Well, very cheery, yeah, sorry.
Right, that's it. I'm drawing. I'm pulling the curtains across there. After a conveniently placed sting promoting our social media channels, we will be back and ready to explore the relative sanctuary of Thames Water and the utilities industry.
Find us as Digital Bulletin on LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram, and at Digi_Bulletin on Twitter.
Our case study section this month sees us reflect on our cover story from the March edition of the Digital Bulletin magazine, Thames Water and the tech initiatives led by CIO Tony McCandless. Demanding stakeholders and customers, along with strict regulations, mean the utilities industry might not appear at first to be the perfect arena for technology excellence, but even this sector is seeing some fairly transformative work when it comes to IT and product development. McCandless joined Thames Water in 2017 and has since completed an end-use compute refresh, app remediations, the rollout of a new CRM and billing platform, among many other things. Over the next 5 years, the UK's biggest water company is putting a further £1 billion behind digital initiatives. Here is the CIO himself to tell us more.
Spend $1 billion over the next 5 years, it is a lot of money. Put it in context, Thames runs 139,000 kilometres of water and waste network, which would go around the world 3.5 times. That is 4 times the amount of assets that the whole of Scottish Water run an entire country on. We have got to invest in technology inside that network in order to know what's going on with it. Where is water flowing, what are pressures, how are the pipes in there, how are the sewage treatment works, and bring that together in a data model that allows us to be more proactive than reactive. So if we can know what's going on within our networks before they become issues, hopefully we can stop bursts, we can stop flooding for people, we can, contribute to cutting down on environmental pollution issues. And then other technologies that we look at are things like, just now we generate 20% of our own power. We want to really try and get that as far as we possibly can, and technology will be a critical part of it.
Now, obviously £1 billion sounds like a lot of money, guys, but do you think, to those in technology, this kind of investment is now a necessity for companies like Thames Water? I don't know who wants to kick off on this.
Yeah, is the answer to that. I mean, especially if you're a water company who probably has quite a big legacy, history going on. So that is therefore relatively expensive if you're tearing up a whole bunch of actually quite old stuff. A big part of that budget, of course, is, as we were talking about earlier on, it's not actually about the technology, it's about getting people to use new stuff, which has huge overheads in terms of recruitment, in terms of training, and all those other things. So
a big part of the work McCandless has already overseen actually was involved Accenture, who featured obviously on this project, and an end-use compute refresh. It basically means equipping every single worker in Thames Water with a completely new way of working, whether that's a new device or a new collaborative working tool like Microsoft. Microsoft is part of this transformation. So yeah, it's as much about people, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And he's talking about a multi-year spend as well. So actually it breaks down to, less per year. That said, what are the commercial benefits of that at the end of the day? I mean, water companies, utilities companies, in this country anyway, are kind of a strange beast in that they are businesses competitive in the marketplace like any other business while being a monopoly, which kind of is one of those forces that kind of guarantees that they end up becoming slower moving because there's just not as much incentive to do.
Because they're in a monopoly, they have to adhere to very strict regulations.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting that we find in Thames Water and with Tony this real dynamism there.
And I think actually to deliver transformation at a company like Thames Water, you need someone like Tony who is a no-nonsense kind of character, clearly very experienced, but also very adept at separating, a lot of noise. He wasn't one for talking about innovation or anything like that. He was one for talking about service delivery. That was his big message. And he was keen to make the point that what the work they've achieved so far is only sort of step one of the process. Mm-hmm. Obviously, step two is now really making the most of the technologies that they've implemented and implementing new technologies around data and those kind of things to really streamline and help ultimately deliver a better service to cause it's all about customer service, a better service to the 15 million people. And I think he I don't know, his leadership came through really strongly, I thought, in the video and in the article. I think he's very well respected as a technology leader, particularly within the company itself. So yeah, no, obviously there's a lot more you can read on digitalbullet.in about that. But this is all about data, isn't it? And if you throw it forward, Rom, how successful do you think a data strategy can be for someone like Thames Water when you're managing a huge network of, water things,
Water
pipes, sewage, toilets?
I mean, in a sense, this
gathering data from that network is the only way to really feed a strategy that is going to be more efficient.
Absolutely, and in a sense, it's kind of related to the healthcare kind of thing we were talking about, where if a water company fails in its basic duties, people can die. It is that serious. Yeah. So how does what role does data play in that? Well, it's massive. The primary number one opportunity for a utility company, whether it's water or anything else, is the deployment of technologies to grow data, and then on the back end, obviously, how to manage that and analyze it. But the obvious use case being in water being IoT, and leveraging stuff like LoRaWAN. I never know how to say that. LoRaWAN. People say it differently. Yeah. That's expanding rapidly around Europe and in the UK as well, where you're looking at the ability to connect lots and lots of relatively simple devices over very large areas, and to understand, therefore, if you're a water company, things like, have we got contaminated water at any point in the system? Are we seeing a leak, and knowing where that leak is? And overall, that means, or it should mean, quite quickly, your costs are able to be managed down much more effectively, and the service ultimately you're delivering to your end customer is going to be that much better.
Yeah. One of the data challenges that I found really interesting that Tony spoke about was how the company manages to convert the knowledge that a lot of its staff have been there for many, many years, right at the beginning when Thames Water was also a very people-centric business, like most businesses before technology took over, how to convert that knowledge and that data into something that Thames Water can work with going forward when those people have retired. Because I think, you get that, don't you? You get individuals who have worked at companies so long, you have this sort of trove of knowledge and information. People don't really have that anymore because technology has played such a big part. So I think he spoke quite a lot about that challenge and how they managed to bring it into their own, quotes, data factory. as I said, like the strong message from this project throughout was the fact, Tony wasn't really going to be talking about words like innovation and digital excellence, that kind of thing. For Thames Water, it is all simply about delivering the best experience to the 15 million customers around London and the Thames Valley, and he explains more in this clip.
Our end customers are really critical to Thames. It's an interesting situation in that certainly in the UK and England and Wales, the water companies' customers are bound to the region. So you can't choose necessarily where to go and get your water. And I know that irks some people, but it's kind of practical in that we own the assets that we deliver the service by, and therefore the customers take advantage of those assets. Someone needs to pull that together as a service. Thames is absolutely obsessed with customer service. It's one of the great things about being here. In previous roles, I've had to worry about quarterly sales cycles and profit and loss margin and all of these things. I don't have to worry about that here. What I focus on is getting value for money for Thames Water and its customers, and then trying to help our teams deliver great customer service.
Right, guys, customer obsession. We hear it from pretty much everyone we speak to. This is a real example of that, isn't it? Because there's nothing between Thames Water and its customers. It has to just deliver, doesn't it?
Yeah, in real time, at all times,
Yeah.
with no interruptions ever. Yeah, and so actually, if you go back to the question of data that we were talking about, that is therefore representative of what it must do in the future to understand its customers better.
Do you think we as consumers expect and maybe give utilities companies a bit of a hard time when you consider the challenge that someone like Tony is trying to solve and this kind of service that we expect from them?
Probably. I mean, the only time you would ever really have contact with them is when something goes wrong, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, we're talking about. We spoke a little bit earlier in the podcast about sort of societal panic. Well, if your tap stopped running, or that very, very quickly would turn into a huge problem. I think that we probably do give them a hard time, and we don't actually think about what. I think he spoke about the amount of people that they service makes it, in terms of the number of customers it has, like one of the biggest in the country. We don't really think of these utility companies or semi-governmental companies or organisations in that fashion, really. Yeah. And like I said, the only time that we sort of jump up and down and communicate with them is when we have an issue. So it was interesting to sort of turn that on its head a little bit. And I think one thing I'd certainly echo is, having been around Tony for the day, that's certainly somebody who would be, if you worked for him, you'd be very clear on what your main job was, and that 100% was, it has to be about the customer experience, the customer satisfaction, and actually everything else is almost secondary to that. How everything in terms of technology is all geared around the customer experience, the customer satisfaction, and actually if you're any organisation, if you have that real top line objective, that's a really useful thing to have, isn't it? Because you can be really laser focused in on that.
It's interesting, actually, just to add to that, one of the things that they will evolve over time, especially when they've got a data-led strategy, is to improve the communication that they've got with their customers in the end. And if you think about it, they're in a lose-lose situation at all times, right? Yeah. So they provide perfect service and basically no one cares. And then there's a problem, and then they hear from people pretty quickly. And then when they fix the problem, they hear from people again because they're digging up the road and disrupting their lives. And it's basically they just can't win. Now, if, however, their customers had real-time access to their own dashboard, really, which said, actually, here's everything that's going on in the Thames network.
Thames Water are doing that. They are working on a new application for end customers to have a complete visibility on.
Right, that transparency piece. And so customers in the end will understand that there's an awful lot of complexity behind basically just turning on a tap. So
will they though? Or,
well, it's funny. Tony might not appreciate me saying this, but after the interview off camera, I said, "So are your customers now happy?" And he's like, "No."
That's just the default position, I think, if you're in that kind of business.
They face the problem that most companies don't. Is that the only acceptable thing is 100% uptime, and even then, your customers aren't going to run around telling. So, if you had any other areas of business or companies that you use or stuff like that, who
provided that level of uptime, you wouldn't shut up telling friends, family about how good this was.
Yeah.
When it's a utility company, it's like, well, that's what you're supposed to do.
Just to give some like idea of, they're doing what they're saying here, Thames Water. This isn't a load of sort of PR fluff to try and make it look like they're engaging with digital. Like one of the initiatives we spoke about was something they called the Spring Program, which was a years-long mission which involved loads of like huge technology players like Wipro and Accenture all coming together with Thames Water to deliver a new CRM and billing platform, which the end user wouldn't bat an eyelid to. But this is something that probably improves their customer service by a few percentage points. But it cost £150 million and took a number of years and a huge commitment from a number of people within that company to do. And they finished the final migration onto that platform at the end of December just gone. So it's a huge amount of work that no one really knows anything about, and it costs a whole load of money. It's that kind of thing where you realise the challenges that these guys are under.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And if they'd actually been if they had an app already through which they could talk to people about this work that they were going, and they felt able to be transparent about it, think how much money they could have saved on PR and communications people.
Yeah.
Maybe that's an upside.
We are very expensive.
Right.
Right, yeah, so let's wrap up on this one. As I said earlier, you can see the sort of full feature written by me and all the videos involving all Thames Water's technology partners on digitalbullet.in. It's well worth a look. But don't go away, listener. We've got some fascinating input coming up from Richard Brown, CTO of blockchain firm R3, after this.
Power up your day with the Bulletin Brief, the latest news, insights and opinion delivered straight to your inbox. Subscribe now at digitalbullet.in.
To those of you with a keen interest in blockchain and the deployment of this technology, Corda, as one of the foremost open source blockchain platforms in enterprise today, will probably be familiar to you. Corda was created by R3 and is enabling direct and secure transacting for hundreds of businesses around the world. Now, Richard Brown is R3's Chief Technology Officer and, because of that, one of the architects behind Corda, and he believes this technology has the potential to impact entire markets, not just improve single organizations. I started off by asking Richard about this and why he so passionately believes in the power of blockchain to make a difference at this level.
It's a good question, and I guess there's always the danger of you should be worried by someone who looks like they've got religion about something that they previously didn't have. But for me, it was back in 2015 when we at R3 sort of began our journey and did the work that led to the creation of what is now Corda, our open source blockchain platform. And it was when we were looking at what is the essential thing that platforms like Bitcoin or Ethereum in the public blockchain space, what's the essential thing they've achieved? And it seemed to be that they could bring parties who wanted to transact with each other but who didn't fully trust each other, bring them into consensus about things they cared about. Now, obviously, in a public network like Bitcoin, it's how many Bitcoins there are, or and who owns them, and so forth. But it made us think. It made us ask the question: what if you could apply the same principles to bring parties who wanted to transact with each other for any purpose into consensus? Could that unlock, what you might call the holy grail, that IT traditionally has been used to optimize individual firms, the ERP revolution, the HRM revolution, all these applications and systems that were developed and delivered over the previous decades. And so the idea, the thing that made me realize that this could be different was, what if you could achieve the same thing, applications that understand the business processes of markets, but deploy them in a distributed fashion amongst the participants in that market without having to introduce a new central intermediary or introduce a new central party to run it, but instead people were able to transact directly peer-to-peer and between themselves. Maybe we could finally move from the world of firms optimizing themselves to industries optimizing themselves instead.
So guys, we're talking about open source blockchain here, and something that we all sort of know is hugely exciting and kind of high potential in the enterprise world. What do you think open source platforms like Corda can offer to markets? I mean, Richard called it the holy grail in there. I mean, it's quite a big statement, that, isn't it?
Well, I mean, essentially what they're proposing is standards, kind of, in that if you want to unlock the potential of this thing, everyone's got to agree really on how it works. That's always been the problem so far. You've got a number of different parties who are all trying to develop different use cases and coming up with slightly different engineering solutions to make those work. And in the end, that's probably the primary delaying factor for any of this actually really taking root.
Do you think open source is the way to go then?
Yeah, 100%. In the end, blockchain should just become the medium through which competent entities deliver great services, and they should be measured on the back of how good they are at delivering those services, not on how well that they're able to engineer the basic rails upon which those things are running. Maybe these guys have got the solution. Maybe that will unlock all of this. And as he says, the main benefit of that is not going to be in cryptocurrencies and things like that. That's basically a get-rich-quick scheme, as far as I see it.
That's pretty controversial.
Maybe I'm being a bit cynical there, but it's actually going to be how it fundamentally impacts industries, as he's talking about, where you can vastly streamline the complex transactional processes, and that's not just money, that's contracts, that's all sorts of stuff. So yeah.
James, can you see a future where rivals, basically in markets and industries, are committing to sort of a common cause, whether it's an open blockchain sort of platform like this? Do you see? Because we see collaboration a lot more these days, don't we, between rivals? But this is taking that to another level, isn't it?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I think that there's a battle to be won by which blockchain it is or which stable coin is going to be used. So I don't think we're quite there yet. But I do think it's in 5 to 10 years, that is something we will see more and more, because I just think as we see more use cases and more proof of concept, that actually it will be something that is demanded by consumers and businesses alike, actually, because it is as Rom said, a far more streamlined, a far more effective way of whereas paying for goods and services or developing contracts or any of those things that traditionally have been very sort of complex things to do. It takes so much of that complexity away that actually I think that it will. But I think we're a little bit away in terms of how long that's going to take. I still think there's some work to do there.
I think that's a general problem with blockchain, isn't it? We're still not 100% sure on exactly how this is going to play out. Something else I was interested to get Richard's thoughts on was blockchain's perception in industry and whether there was an imbalance between hype and application. Here is he on that topic.
It's interesting because it does seem almost, maybe not uniquely, but it does seem quite rarely as a technology that it is simultaneously very hyped and yet there's also, maybe because of that, there's also a lot of questioning and even cynicism in some quarters. And to be frank, I think some of that is deserved. The industry in quotes, I think as a whole, has in certain quarters oversold the technology or tried to apply it to problems to which it's not well suited. Whereas, I like to think that the problems we're solving or that our clients are solving on top of our platform are good fits. Perhaps again because we had that unique opportunity to design a platform to meet some requirements rather than carbon copied from something else. So there's definitely that. There's also, I think, the case that whenever there's a new technology, especially one that seems to have been hyped, you get a lot of inbound, a lot of people wanting to use it, and you have to spend a lot of time really trying to figure out, which of them are following fashion and which of them really have a problem that this technology is well suited to fix.
Having a problem the technology is suited to fix. That's the real sort of crux here. Rom, do you think blockchain's been oversold in the last few years?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Like 100%. I mean, it's been knocking around for years now.
Yeah.
And the principle on paper of it as a transformative piece of technology has always been there, and we're still kind of waiting. Really, there will be certain key milestones, I suppose, and I don't know. I'm no expert, but it feels like we're still a way away from really seeing this actually impact people like us, on the end of things. The day that sorting out a house purchase or a mortgage doesn't take like nearly 2 months or something will be the day that I realise that actually some of these things are actually beginning to work, because there's less bureaucrats shuffling bits of paper around,
getting rich from it. Let's call it what it is.
All that, and that actually might be the reason it still takes ages, because there's an awful lot of resistance. A lot of very specialised and well-paid people who enjoy sitting in the middle of people who would otherwise be transacting seamlessly. So.
Middlemen make a hell of a lot of money,
yeah.
And this is and one of the promises or claims of of good blockchain is that actually that will take that away. So we're going to find huge resistance to it if indeed
probably.
that is the case.
And I think what you're saying, Rom, is that the moment it becomes has a real impact is when we kind of stop hearing about it, when it's just accepted as like part of the.
It's a we want it to be a protocol that everyone understands and shares, right? And then that said, there will be certain industries where I think we'll start to see some real things happening really soon. In particular, logistics as a sector where you're using blockchain to reliably track and trace vast quantities of stuff shuffling around the world. That you can see as being, use cases. But then even then they're going to start deploying technologies that are proprietary perhaps to them, and it's going to be a competitive landscape. And even then maybe that's part of the problem because we're not sharing this stuff. But generally speaking, I think my sense is we're still a way away. And yes, it has been hyped.
Yeah. Now, we do have a lot of blockchain champions. Obviously, we hear a lot from them, and that they argue that its potential for good, its potential for really sort of positive change in society is big. James, you spoke to somebody in this field, Charles Hoskinson, who was one of the co-founders of the Ethereum network. Do you want to just talk a bit about what that piece was about and how blockchain can be for good?
Sure. I mean, Charles is an interesting guy. He's got thought of as a bit of a maverick but actually he was first class. I spoke to him for about an hour while he was at the Davos event a couple of months ago, and actually you can see why he's got where he is at such a young age, because first and foremost he's a good salesman. I came off the call thinking, let's have some of that. But and I wrote an article in last month's publication about some of the work he's doing in Africa, and he's very passionate about the potential for blockchain to do some real positive things for huge amounts of society, particularly in this case in Africa. So he's working with, or having many conversations with the government of Ethiopia in this case in particular. He works with many governments and stakeholders and companies in Africa, but a lot of what we spoke about was the work he's doing in Ethiopia at the moment, where and this is true of a lot of the developing world, where people have to queue in the streets for hours and hours to pay utility bills, for example. They have these places where they can do it, and of course his argument is that actually in those countries, in terms of smartphone adoption, actually it's quite high, and there is the technology. In this case, he's talking about a blockchain platform where people could just do this on their phone. So he's in conversations to develop pilots in Ethiopia, and to begin with it would be in Addis Ababa, which is the capital city where there's about 4 million people, to work with those guys to develop these blockchains where people could pay their bills instantly, for example. And it does seem absolutely ridiculous, of course, that people are queuing in the street for hours and hours at a time when there is this technology that would allow them to do it instantly, of course. Yeah. So that's one of the very small pieces that he's doing around in Africa. And of course, when it gets put to you like that, you think, well, of course we should be doing that. I mean, the alternative seems utterly ridiculous, especially bringing it back to what's going on now in these times where we're supposed to be socially isolating. I mean, queuing up in the street for hours at a time doesn't seem like a particularly good, or in terms of your health, a particularly clever thing to be doing right now.
Yeah, I think it is logistics and it is financial services where we see the biggest potential. And I think we've got another piece, the second part of the interview with Charles coming up.
Yeah, well, it's the first time I've ever used an interview and done a two-part. But as I said, he's a big talker, and he's an interesting character. So the bit that's online now, digitalbullet.in, if anyone's interested in going and reading that, is very much about this sort of blockchain for good, in particular in Africa. But there was so much on the cutting room floor, so to speak. He puts various crypto coin companies on blast for disgracing the industry and stuff like that, and so that will be coming up in our next issue. But he talks about blockchain more in a general sense, and also his Cardano stablecoin, which he's got. He's got some pretty interesting opinions. As an interviewee, he's perfect because he's got a lot to say. He's pretty forthright, says what he thinks. It's perfect.
And Richard Brown from Arthur is the same as well. So thanks to Richard for his time. Okay, guys, right, you might find yourselves with a bit of spare time on your hands. right now, so please don't forget to go and read issue 14 of our magazine. James has just primed it nicely for you there. It's a really good issue, and our other podcasts, long-form articles in audio form, and Fragmented Reality, our series where we bust the buzzwords in enterprise tech. But that is quite enough for today. Thank you, Romilly.
No, thank you. I'll see you in a few months.
Yeah, see you then. Thank you, James.
No worries at all.
And thanks to you, listener, for tuning in. We'll speak to you soon.
That was the Digital Bulletin podcast, brought to you by Bulletin Media. Listen and subscribe to a range of podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. Plug into digitalbullet.in for news, features and case studies on the very latest in enterprise technology and digital transformation.